Here you go.
Alright, so pretty much the course I'll be teaching is called The History of Climbing Yosemite Valley. This is actually the week 5 lecture, so at this point there's already been like touching on the history and how Yosemite Valley came to be found and like some of the controversy over it and everything. And it's going to go over some basic stuff so you guys, since you guys aren't in the class, you could kind of just catch up to some brief stuff. Pretty much this is one of the most famous pictures you'll ever see of Yosemite Valley. It is of John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt standing over Yosemite Valley back in, I think the photo is actually taken in 1890. But in 1891, Yosemite Valley becomes the first national park. And it's actually run by the United States Army for the longest time, and they kind of ruled it with like an iron fist and told people like, if you come here, you have to get approval from the government, and it has to be like reason why you're here to go camping, hiking, exploring, something. And it wasn't until the Park Service took over in 1918 that kind of like, or 1916, that kind of like, they had a more relaxed policy in how you could explore Yosemite Valley, and that's when they put up like the first hiking trails and stuff all throughout the parks. It's kind of a movement away from like that military style rule and really like establish what a national park would be. And Yosemite Valley actually had a big influence on the role and like the shaping of the rest of the national parks. Alright, so the big thing about this is climbing. To understand this, you have to really understand what they saw when they went to these valleys and why they saw these as such a big challenge. This is El Capitan. This is it's probably one of the most well-known besides Half Dome, which you'll see in a second. And El Capitan is pretty much, it's 3,600 feet from about right around here to about there. So that's, you can imagine that's 3 times the Empire State Building. So take the Empire State Building 3 times, that's El Capitan. And it's pretty intense. If you've ever been to Yosemite and you sit down at the bottom and look up, your neck will literally hurt from staring straight up. And it's one of the most beautiful sights in the entire world. It's actually pretty cool. The other one is Half Dome. This is one of the most like iconic photos that you'll probably ever see of Yosemite is a picture of Half Dome. It's a little bit shorter than El Capitan. It's about 2,500 feet from the valley floor, but that's kind of cheating because the valley floor starts like somewhere over here is when they count it. So it's still a pretty long climb up to the top, but it was seen as a little bit easier when they first started looking at it. But as you can imagine, them sitting down on the floor looking up at this, it gives you a real like perspective of what you're actually doing. And like nowadays there's hikes that take you to the top, but it's not the same as, of course, climbing at the face of it, which was something that had never been done up until this guy came along, Royal Robbins. He was actually born in 1935. He is now known as one of the like most renowned climbers in the entire world. At the time, he was seen as kind of like a crazy beatnik fellow who would, it's like, everyone thought he was like, oh, this crazy, like, he was seen as like an intellectual, so he was like this idea of, like, what's the way to put it, like, like the Great Gatsby, how like that like style of like living, how that's what he like pictured that, but in like a mountain man style. That was his like philosophy. Like he would read and like sip like champagne and stuff on like the valley floor, and he was like this, like it was like his name was literally royal. Like that was how people looked at him, was like this king of Yosemite Valley. And he was one of the first people to ever climb Half Dome, him and his team. And he was very traditional with his climbing, as you can see, ropes and everything. He was very like meticulous. And every way they climbed, they knew exactly which steps they were taking, where they were going. And it's that true emphasis on the idea of traditional climbing. And we see the next guy comes along. His name's Warren Harding. He's actually a little bit older. He was kind of the complete opposite, which we'll go into a little later, but he was a little bit older, and he ended up dying in 2002, living with his mom. And he was a climber, and the best way to describe this guy was he was a life enthusiast. He literally liked everything that could possibly be bad for you, and that was the way he wanted to live his life. He became known as the first guy to ever climb El Capitan, which was at the time seen like historically. And there was actually an ascent that he does to El Capitan later on in, I think it's like 1963 or 1964. They climb El Capitan, and it's one of the most like biggest covered like news coverages of a climb ever recorded in like, it's pretty much the most famous climb in U.S. history. And we'll talk about that a little later. But he climbs the Dawn Wall, and it becomes the most famous ascent of any wall in the United States. So, looking at those two guys, a good way to get an understanding of who they were was their climbing methods. And this is something that really comes into play. Was that, like, to Royal, climbing was sacred. He saw it as like, there was the only, like, what's more important than getting to the top is how do you climb it. And that was his like personal philosophy, and he spread that throughout all the guys that were climbing with him, because these two guys were basically like I said, they were the kings of Yosemite Valley. So there was all these people that were looking up to them saying like, oh, I want to climb like Royal, or I want to climb like Harding. And something that I didn't mention, but it's like, it came a little bit before this, was that climbing in the Yosemite Valley started in a place called Camp 4, which is still, you can still go there, you can still go camping on that exact camping spot in Yosemite Valley. But Camp 4 is where essentially rock climbing in Yosemite started. And that's where Royal Robbins got his start, and that's also where Harding got his start too as well. So you see these guys have this like mentality coming out of that they shaped their style based on the other climbers that they saw. And so the other climbers, as these guys got higher and higher in the pedigree, they shaped their climbing the way they did. So Royal's method was more of like preserving the route. He wanted to climb this using what they called pitons at the time, and they still have something similar to that, but it's a little more like futuristic now, where it wouldn't affect the wall. When they climbed these cracks, they would hammer these things into the cracks that wouldn't affect it, but would still be effective for them to climb. So it wasn't damaging the wall in any way, shape, or form. And one thing they believed was that the only way to climb is to just go straight up and not go up and down the rock, which is kind of, you'll see something that Warren does. And he had this famous saying of committing to the unknown, because half the time you had no idea what was going to happen when you got up there. And that was a philosophy that he liked to climb by. Was some like things might go wrong, but if they do, you still have to like keep climbing to the top. There's no way to get up, to come down once you get up to a certain point up. So they really had no choice, and they had to keep climbing. And we get here to Harding's style. Harding was he actually came onto the climbing scene a little bit after Royal Robbins did, and Warren wanted that title of being the king of Yosemite Valley. He lived a very frivolous lifestyle. As you can see, he was a bit of an alcoholic. He did have a drinking problem. He actually started as a construction worker. He lived with his mom until he was about 30, and his mom named him after a president, so Warren Harding. And he kind of was like, if you can see with some of the pictures of him, he had the long mangy hair and always had a beard and looked like a homeless guy climbing mountains. And it was what he was going for. These guys were around during that the emergence of the counterculture, and he saw himself as truly living out that lifestyle of how could I do this different? And he didn't really believe that there was a set method to how you would climb something. He always thought I can do this my way. And going against that idea of Royal Robbins at the time was insane. People were like, what is this guy doing? He's going to ruin climbing. And people saw that. People in the community saw that, and some were like, I like that. That's what I want to do. So it kind of created this rift between the two ideas of do I climb this way or do I climb this way? And you start to see it's kind of that emergence, and it mirrors the counterculture movement that's going on between the traditionalist people and more of the younger people that are oh, let's do it this way, this seems cooler. And it kind of portrays in what's going to happen after this, because we start to see a real battle start between these two guys. And it's about who climbs what first. And it's pretty much, it goes on for about 10 years. Starts in 1957 when Royal Robbins climbs Half Dome for the first time. But as you can see, from what I've already talked about, they're polar opposites in their styles. One's a little bit more free range, and the other one's more traditional. This is the way you do this. And it really shows up in their climbing styles and the way they climb these walls. Alright, so it starts with Royal Robbins doing the first ascent of Half Dome in 1957. And so the thing about this was that people saw these walls. And were like, there's no way you can climb that. This is going to take forever. You're going to get exhausted halfway up. You're not going to be able to make it to the top. You're not going to be able to come down. And honestly, that's what started these guys their push to do this. That's what they wanted to do. And as you can see, it took his team of 3 people, took them 5 days to get to the top. So this is the exact route they took. They would go up, camp about a little higher, go up, camp, go up, camp, go up, camp, and eventually make it to the top. This route, the 2 routes here, are actually 2 routes that Royal Robbins set while climbing, and they're still there today. People still climb the exact same routes that they climbed back in the 60s and 50s. After that, of course, Harding being a little upset, sitting down on the valley floor, seeing Royal climbing to the top of these mountains, he wanted to do the same. But he wanted to challenge that, and he would end up climbing the nose of El Capitan, which you can see from here. This is the route that he took, and it goes literally up the spine of El Capitan, straight up the nose. And it was unthinkable. People were like, this guy's insane, they're gonna die up there. And instead of taking the 5 days that it took Royal and his team to do it, it took them 18 months to climb this. They would, instead of taking all their gear with them to start, they would climb up to a certain point, set up a spot, and then they would anchor ropes into the wall. And they would go up and down, like pull supplies up, anything they needed. And it was kind of like literally the exact opposite of what I was saying to do when they were climbing. So as you can see, like, these guys really pushed like what was capable of climbing. And they didn't think, like, we're like, oh yeah, you can spend as much time as you want up on the wall. Like, and guys would go up and down, they would be up on the wall for a couple of days, climb a little more, go down, climb a little more. And like, they would go up and down the walls all the time. After about 2 years, they finally made it to the top. And it really kicked off the start of what would be seen as like this battle between the two, because Robbins saw this and kind of he was pissed. He was like, why on earth are they doing this? Why are they taking so long to climb these walls? And so literally, right as winter was starting, Royal went out to prove that you can climb this wall the right way. And so him and his team of 4 guys, this is an actual picture of them at the very top after they had climbed it. They climbed the whole thing without any fixed ropes, and they didn't go up and down the rocks. It took them 18 months, it took them a week to do. So they literally went out to prove them wrong. They were like, that's not how you're supposed to do it. This is the Royal Robbins method of how to climb these rocks. And they literally put their foot down on what they wanted to do. And it's what started like this whole like real battle between the two of them, because it was a clash of these methods, and at this time it was, like I said earlier, it was mirroring what was going on in the rest of the world. And so Robbins really struck back. He ended up climbing what was called the South Wall, and this was named after like this philosopher who was like talked about how life is full of suffering and like stuff. And so Robbins really believed in that. And if you look at it, so this is the Dawn Wall, this is the South Wall on the side, and then the nose is right there. As you can see, the wall goes up and then starts to pitch over. So as you're climbing up, it's literally like hanging over you, so you have to go up and like onto like a vertical ledge. And so it was seen as like the hardest rock climb in the world at the time. No one ever thought like, oh yeah, let's try to do this, this will be fun. Everyone thought they were insane for trying to do it. And it only took them, I think, like 14 days to climb the whole thing, because they got like, at a certain point, they were kind of getting a little like sketched out by climbing the rest of it. And after this, it started a spark for Royal Robbins. He would end up climbing all of the faces on all the walls in El Capitan, setting I think 4 more routes up the face, up the South Wall, and then another route up the nose. But he wouldn't touch the Dawn Wall, and on Half Dome he set up like another 4 or 5 routes to climb Half Dome. And at the same time, you see Warren like kind of sitting back in the background, still climbing stuff, but not as like notable as what Royal Robbins was doing. And then we see later on like the critique of Robbins' critique on Harding. He really like goes out and says like what he was doing wrong. He publicly would like tell people when he was climbing like, that he didn't like the way that he was using, like they would literally go up these faces and they would find spots that were smooth, that of course you can't climb a smooth rock. So what they would do is they would reach over as far as they could, hammer into the wall, and like these little hooks that you would see, they would set their ropes there and just keep climbing. And reach over to the next spot and hammer another one. And it actually becomes really controversial because it's hurting the wall. It's something that eventually would cause harm to the wall. If these like rusted out, there would be like holes throughout the rest of these walls. And Royal, being his traditional style, saw this as like a kind of cheating. And that's one thing he says, that they were able to climb things that were seen as unclimbable because of these expansion bolts. And it also reflected in like their personal philosophies. Royal saw Harding as a bit of a loose cannon and didn't like the way he was spending his like time off the wall, and that's something that came out too, because I think Harding ended up getting into like 2 car accidents because he was drunk in Yosemite Valley. I think he killed, he was a part of like an accident that really like hurt someone. I don't know if the person died, but I remember reading about that in one of the books I was going through for this project. Yes, so right afterwards, Harding wanted to do something that would really push climbing, and so he set out to climb the Dawn Wall, which I mentioned earlier is this wall right here, which there's entire sections here that are just smooth, going straight up. So of course it was seen as something like that is truly unclimbable. And so I think him and one other person set out to do this, and they wanted to do it and like to spite Royal. So they didn't set any fixed ropes. They went up with the supplies they needed, which was about 2 weeks worth of supplies, and it was something that they saw as like a necessity to do it that way just to prove him wrong. And of course, as they start climbing up, they get about halfway and there's a storm coming into Yosemite Valley that lasts about, I think it's like 6 days. They end up getting stuck in a certain spot for about 26 days is how long they end up in the exact same spot. And so of course this whole big, like, the National Park Service and everything, they freak out. They're like, oh no, these guys might die up on this wall. They might not be able to get down. They've been there for so long. They end up like going up in a helicopter there and telling them, oh, we're gonna try to rescue you. And Harding writes on like this little he writes this note and puts it in this little bottle and drops it down. And it says on there like, we don't need the rescue, but in not so much those words because I can't say those words that he put on the paper. But pretty much he said they didn't want to get rescued. And eventually they start to make a push for the top. And these guys, literally all the other climbers were watching them in Yosemite Valley. Even Warren Harding's mom was there, and she was on the megaphone like talking up to them and stuff so that they can hear him. And so like there's crazy news coverage going on, and everyone around the world is like tuning in to see these guys climb because people are freaking out. They're like, these guys have been stuck up there for so long and everything. And it ends up being once they get to the very top, there's news, like you can see all the news crews waiting for them to interview them to ask them why they're climbing, and like all this crazy stuff is going on. And one of the reporters said it was as if the Beatles had landed on the top of El Capitan. That's how crazy it was up there when they finally made it to the top. So as you can imagine, Warren would become a like national sensation. He was on like a bunch of like news stations and stuff all throughout the world, and was like touring the United States to talk about his climb and everything. And of course, Robbins is sitting down at the bottom, kind of pissed, because there's literally people, one of the books they said that you can see the line of bolts going straight up the face. So throughout the climb, they were setting bolts to kind of help themselves go up. And Warren was kind of a little upset about it, so he set out to do the exact same climb of the face. And while he was climbing it, every single time they cross a bolt, he would go with a chisel and just hammer it out. So every bolt that he saw, he would go up and chisel it out. And even one of Royal's friends was like, dude, you can't keep doing this. Like, is this why you're climbing this face? And basically he said, yeah, it was a revenge climb. He wanted to get back at Harding for doing it this way. And it was everyone that was in the climbing community was kind of upset about him doing this, and they both of them were like going back and forth between each other about like why this was not okay and everything. Wasn't necessarily the best thing in the world he could have done at the time, but he eventually does climb the whole route, and he even says as he was like halfway up, he realized how ingenuitive some of these like climbs were, and how much work and how hard the climb actually was, and he was imagining how it must have been when they were climbing it, and he realized like they may have done it like a different way, but it wasn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, and it was actually like pretty ingenious that they climbed some of the routes up at the top in particular. And so this picture is actually pretty famous because it's the only picture of them two that they have together. They hated each other up until a certain point, and I think this was actually 2 years before Harding died. So yeah, it was a little while ago. But yeah, and anyway, so Royal Robbins goes on to make a clothing company. You can still go online and buy his stuff today. He's still alive, I think. Last time I checked, he was still alive. Harding passed away in 2002. He had a bit of a drinking problem. I think he ended up dying from some like liver issues. But yeah, so they both kind of went in their like separate directions after this. Neither one of them would ever climb again in Yosemite Valley after this. They would go climb throughout the rest of the world and kind of set the tone for the climbing community. But in Yosemite, that was their last like big push. Neither one of them ever climbed a big wall in Yosemite again. As you can see, there are like two different styles lasted throughout the rest of climbing. It's still kind of are a little emphasized today. There's still people that see it as like oh, you can climb this way, or no, you got to do it like the more like the harder it is, the better the climb type of people. But as throughout like the lecture that I just gave, you can see how like these two ideas represent really the counterculture and like the older generation that was going on throughout the rest of the world. And it really like reflected and like paralleled their climbing methods to the movement that was going on in like the 1960s and 50s. Yeah.
Questions?
Any questions, concerns?
What is the class?
What is the class? It's the history of climbing in Yosemite Valley. So it's basically from I started at the beginning where we talked about Yosemite a little bit, just the history of it, and then like the first few climbing people, because people climbed, but they didn't think to climb the big walls. These were the first two guys to ever really challenge the two like biggest faces in Yosemite. And then afterwards, it talks a little more about like modern climbing and like the crazy guys that are climbing without ropes and all that shenanigans. And there is a bit more of a counterculture that goes on in like the 70s in Yosemite, and then it's the whole like clash between the park rangers and like the climbing community.